hot, 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 less hot, 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 hot. It's on stage. It's on stage. No, on stage.
On.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. Now stay there. Okay. Now what did we observe? What was she doing? Yes, tell me.
In the starting, she was actually roaming in a C shape. She was going back, then coming there, then going back, then coming over here. So that's what I noticed.
Okay. All right. Good. Yes.
She was moving to the rhythm of hot and cold. As people said hot, she moved one step, then said another hot, she moved one step again.
Yeah.
And then there was this moment when she was moving here and there again. That there was a certain rhythm to her movement.
Yes. And what was the difference in the energy when it was hot and when it was cold? Was there a difference?
Yeah.
Where she knew that she is closer to finding it?
Yeah, of course, she was happy. When people said cold, she became kind of conscious. And when they said hot, of course, she became happy.
Okay, let's discount the fact that she got a little conscious of, trying to find that, whatever, right? Now, let me get back to a simple question. Did we know what she was doing? What was she doing? She was searching, right? Now, even we knew beforehand that she was searching, right? If we didn't know she was searching and she did that, was she still able to communicate she was searching? She was looking for something, right? And it was perfectly natural, right? She wasn't trying to say, I am searching for something. Is it there? Is it there? Right? She actually got involved in searching, right? So that's action, is you have an objective and you try to meet that objective, and you do that by using space, and you have a different rhythm, you pause, you think, and you look, and you do, maybe you look underneath, you do, so that is when you have an objective, that's when you have truthful action. Okay? Now, here is the thing, is that Arushi didn't know where the object was, right? So what we saw on stage was Arushi looking for an object. That was the truth, right? Now we get into the realm of theater. Is we're going to ask Arushi, you know where that object is. It's going to be right there behind that chair, where you found it. We'll put it exactly in there. But now you have to come on and imagine you don't know. Okay? And we're going to observe, right? Can she still be truthful? That is theater, right? Okay? So, back where it is. And come back on. And now we have two people. We have Arushi, the person who knows, who is the actor, and we have this character, right? This girl who is looking for something. Can we have the screen?
That screen is not on, the video screen. The large plasma one. No, the glass beaded one.
Okay, just look at her. Yeah. Now we are watching acting. She's asking us where. She doesn't know. This character doesn't know. This is not Arushi.
Are we supposed to say hot and cold?
Yeah, when the cue starts.
Well, okay, let's say hot and cold.
Cold.
Cold, cold, warm,
Warm.
hot,
Hot. Cold. Cold.
Now we are hamming. Can you see when she's hamming? When she's overacting? You saw that. Yeah.
Warm.
Hot, 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 hotter, hot, hot.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Very good. Very good, Arushi. Very good. Okay, come, take a mic and come on stage, right? Okay, was she convincing as an actor? Okay, it was just that one moment when she forgot her intention, when she forgot the action, and when she decided to play. That's when she became a ham. What we would call ham is that she's playing, to get some kind of laughs from the audience. So do you see the difference between truthful acting and ham acting, right? So for by and large, apart from that one moment, your acting was very truthful, right? Supposing we were now, the question I want to ask is when she was searching the second time, was she as convincing as the first time? Did you believe her? No? Is that because you knew that she knew?
Yeah, it can be.
It was that. Supposing, now use your imagination. Supposing you didn't know that she knew, would you still believe that she's looking for something?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. To me, I thought that was very truthful acting for the most part of it, except when she started playing to the galleries, right? So that was very good. Now you tell us, when I asked you to look for it and you as Arushi didn't know, right? What were you thinking?
I was just thinking, okay, now this is the stage and it's somewhere in this area, and I was just looking at the audience members to see if anybody would just kind of help me out, and I was looking at ma'am if she'd help me out, and I was just thinking, are they rude enough to put it under the stage? So should I actually go and check, or should I check under the seats? Are the cushions, can the cushions come off the chair? So I was just thinking where it could be.
Okay, so which means the stage came alive by the way she explored the space, right? She looked under my shawl, she looked under the table, she actually knelt on the chair to look behind, she went over there and looked, right? So suddenly the focus was on the space. The space came alive to us because it came alive to her. If it doesn't come alive to her as an actor, it doesn't come alive to us as audiences. That's another golden rule of theatre, is that the actor needs to make it come alive. That is why the theatre is an actor's medium. The actor does it all, because a set can only be representative. No matter how much money you spend on a set, right? It can never be a real garden. It'll always look like a set, right? But it comes alive when the actor uses it and makes it come alive. Very good. Okay, so were you focused on looking for the marker?
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Now, when you became the actor, how did she become an actor? Yeah, but why, what was the difference between the first? Okay, so why was it natural the first time?
She was not knowing about the thing what.
Precisely, she didn't know the end. She didn't know what, where she's going to find this.
Second time she knew it, all the thing what she had to do it out. That was.
Yeah, that's the difference, is that as an actor you know where it's going, right? But you have to imagine that you don't know. Now, you use the word pretend. There's a difference between pretending and imagining, right? Now, by and large, I felt that you imagined you didn't know, and that's why it worked, right? If she pretended she didn't know, she would have done more ham acting, right? That is the difference. That you imagine. The actors imagine that you don't know the end, right? The destiny on stage has already been written, and unlike in real life, we know the destiny of our character, right? As an actor, that's an obvious truth, isn't it? But you must imagine you don't. So an actor's imagination is absolutely vital, right? Now, when the second time, when you knew, as Arushi, you knew where the marker was, were you able to imagine that what if I didn't know?
Yeah, I was able to imagine what if I didn't know, because the first thing that came to my mind is I shouldn't linger too much next to that area, because obviously then the audience would know that I know it's been hidden there. So I started imagining that what would I do if I didn't know it was there. So obviously the obvious places that I would look would be under things and behind the stage. So I started looking at those places which would be the obvious choice. So yeah, I pretty much could imagine not knowing where the object was.
Okay, so that was a good use of imagination, right? But also there is the tendency to sort of lead the audience in a different direction as well, right? Now you have to be very crafty. Of course, it's important that the audience gets the feeling that you don't know. You have that, you know. But at the same time, you have to be clever enough to do it in a way that the audience doesn't feel that they're being misled, right? That again becomes the craft of the actor, right? So anything else you want to say?
No, that's it.
Okay, so what did you get out of this?
I learned that when you're acting, you don't have to pretend, you have to imagine.
Yeah, perfect, thank you. Okay, yes. So, well, I know ideally it would have been nice if we had more space and less
Yes,
people
yeah.
for a workshop.
Absolutely.
So that was just a demonstration.
Yeah.
So if there are any questions,
Thank
maybe
you.
we
Mahesh,
could
I
take-
want to just ask you, we're at a literature festival and there's
Yeah.
so lots of budding writers here.
Oh, good.
Right?
Ah.
All of us have ideas. We think we can write stories. What would you actually, you know, if you could help us to just, what translates a story into a play? I mean, I have an idea, I know vaguely the plot, but how do I write a play? You know, just some, I know it's a lot of talent and a lot of,
Yeah, it's a lot of craft as well.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy answer. But I would say the best way is to draw upon your own instincts of drama, right?
Okay, okay.
Let me, okay, I'm going to give you a short story, right? There was this old lady who lived with her dog, okay? She loved the dog and she had no one else except the dog in her life. One morning, she woke up and to her horror, she sees her dog choking. You know, the dog is choking on something and is on the kitchen floor and gasping for breath. And she got so scared that she carried the dog, took her car and went to the vet, someone who knows her very well, right, and knows, and she was hysterical and she said, doctor, save my dog. He's the only person I have in my life and you have to save him. And the doctor saw that she was she was hyperventilating and it looked like she may have a heart attack. So he very kindly told her, look, I'll tend to your dog, just go back home and when the dog is all right, I will call you and you can come and take your dog. So she trusted the doctor, left the dog there and went home. As soon as she entered her home and opened her door, the phone was ringing, right? The landline was ringing. So she went up and answered the phone, right? And it was the doctor, the vet, on the other side. And even before she could say, is my dog all right, he told her, whatever it is, just leave your house now. That's the story.
okay.
Did you like it? Are you happy with the story?
No.
Why? It has no ending. How did you know that it has no ending? How did you know that's not the end of the story? Yes, let's have the gentleman at the back.
Because there is no linking. You came up with a thought that the dog was taken to the vet. That was the entire thought was not complete. So the linking was not done.
There was no linking, right? So I said something in the beginning and it didn't follow through. How did you know it didn't follow through?
So you're expecting something to,
You can't hear. You have to give him the mic. Sorry. Oh, yeah.
sorry. Because when the doctor said that you go home, right, I'll inform you about it. So it was something that the lady was expecting that she'll get an answer from the doctor. So was I. So was everyone over here. So that linking was started from there, but didn't go all the way, to the end.
Which, what is the end? See, we all know there is no ending to the story, at least how much I told you, right? You all said there's no ending. But how do you know that there's no ending? Yes, the guy there in the red jacket.
We are left with so many questions that are unanswered.
You're left with so many questions that are unanswered. You already have a brilliant playwright over there, right? So, okay, so you know now what it takes to write a play, right? Is that you need a beginning, middle, and end. You had something to say? Yes.
Ask one thing. So I have very important two set of questions.
Just hold it closer so people
yeah.
can hear.
This is better? Okay, great. So I have a couple of questions. A, is it important to have an ending in a play? Can't it be, you can leave it open-ended? B, the next question would be, how do you write a play? How do you decide? How do you decide that whether this is the point where you can leave the play or leave it to the audience?
Ask him, he knows the answer.
So we're going to chat after. Another important thing is it important always to answer the questions? Can't it be, you just leave it to the audience?
Yeah, it is possible. But are you happy with the story the way it ended?
That's a very subjective part.
That's why I'm asking you as a subject. Now, don't tell me, yes, I'm happy, because you're thinking, you're doing the hamming equivalent of writing now. You're curious, you want to know more, right? Okay, now his question is, do all questions need to be answered? I would say no, right? But the question that you have raised in the beginning, that has to be answered. We have to know why the dog was choking, or we have to know why that guy has said, leave your house, right? And ideally, a good ending will be one that answers both these major questions, right? There may be other questions left unanswered, right? But it has to have some kind of a development, right? That is why you have a beginning, a middle, and end, right? And that is very important, that when I say ending, it doesn't mean that everything gets neatly tied, right? But like that gentleman said, that if it leaves all these questions unanswered, right, that's not a story. You need some kind of a resolution over there. It need not be all the questions are answered. Some of them may not be answered. In fact, good stories leave what is called an open ending. There is an ending, but there's also an open there for audiences then to figure out that what could be the outcome of this, right? So now the next step, you are going to end the story. So take a minute, and if anyone has ideas, raise your hand. Oh, there's someone who's already ended the story. Yeah, tell us the rest of it.
The dog ate the gas pipeline, and the gas was open. So the moment she switches on the button, and there would be a blast. So the dog ate the gas pipeline, the rubber pipeline.
Okay, are you happy with that? Does it answer questions? Why?
Can we have the mic there, please? Ma'am, people can't hear you at the back.
Sir, actually, what the answer the guy gave it out.
Just hold it closer.
The answer is not up to the mark, so we are not satisfied with
No,
the
what
ending.
does up to the mark mean? Whose
Up
mark?
to the
Your
mark
mark.
is the dog's chalking. So chalking is the question right now, na?
Sorry?
the chalking of the jog cushion and the phone call, what came it out, just leave the house right now.
Yeah.
So the guy has told her that I'm not
We
taking
can't
the
hear you, ma'am.
answer.
It's just.
I think the mic isn't working.
No, if she holds it close to her mouth.
I'm saying it out, you just ask it out. Are you happy with the guy answer? Your question was this, Nasa. So I'm saying I'm not happy because
Okay, so
actually,
why?
because actually the phone call, what came it out, it's one part linked out, other part point not linked out. So as in play wise, if we have a good ending with a good starting, I will be happy more than that.
Okay, so was there anyone happy with, does it answer all the questions?
No, I
Right,
don't
but
know.
are you happy with the ending? Why? Okay, take the mic, take the mic.
Still want to find out about whether the dog is fine or not.
Volume, please.
Okay, yeah, he's raised a very interesting point, is that intellectually it answers the questions,
yeah.
right? But we are not emotionally involved, right? We need to see what happened to the dog. Is the dog happy? We need to see the old woman coming back to the dog, you know, hugging the dog, and as the tears are rolling down her face, the dog licks the tears off her cheeks, and now she says, my poor Rufus, I will never let you go again out of my sight, right? That becomes emotionally, it answers a question, because we created a union in the beginning, we created a separation in the middle, and we then have to come back to the union, right? So beginning, middle, and end, right? Isn't that what all boy meet girl story is about? Exactly that. It's so simple, and yet we're rewarded, right? Of course, if it's done well. And like Arushi said, that if we have beginnings, middles, and end that are predictable, if the audience knows where it's going, then it's no fun, right? You have to make it in a way that it's unpredictable. But the fact is, the structure is so simple. Beginning, middle, end. You have a union, you have a separation, and you have an even stronger union than in the beginning, right? So if this were to be made into a drama, the beginning would have a day-to-dayness about the old lady and the dog. Like she's feeding the dog, she pats it, she goes to bed, maybe the dog jumps into bed with her, and she snuggles up to the dog, and they go to sleep. So we could see the union. That's a regular thing, right? But after the separation, when you have the reunion, it will be much stronger. She would hug the dog would lick her face and wagging the tail and knocking down a couple of vases and things, and then she's jumping, and then she goes, and then as the camera pulls out and the credits roll, she is running in the park along with her dog, you know, and that's the end. Yes, into the sunset or the sunrise. Yeah, so that's what. So think about it. How would then you make? How will you put what solution you offered into time? There has to be a temporal quality to storytelling. Things happen from one to the other. The story we saw on stage, where Arushi was looking for the marker, it happens from moment to moment, right? So if the call comes and and he says, get out of the house now, and she says, why, doctor? And he says, because there's a gas leak, and because the dog swallowed the pipe, that's why he was choking, and now there's gas in your house, and if you turn on a switch, you're going to get blown into a million pieces, right? And if she says that, oh, thank you, and she runs out of the house, is that a good story? No. Although it answers all the questions, what it does is, it robs you of your emotional involvement. It only satisfies you intellectually, right? So people need to invest in a good story, in relationships. Why do you think boy meet girl stories work so well in Bollywood? Because that's all we're concerned about, right? You guys are concerned about having a girlfriend in your life, right? Aren't you, right? You want a boyfriend, or you already have one, right? So whatever it is, that seems to be our preoccupation. Oh, older people like me, oh, I wish I had this romance still going on. Maybe I'll meet this mature person who's 50 plus. So whatever, right? So there's always that little bit of us that wants this beautiful relationship. happening, right? Yes, you have a question.
I just want to ask, what if there is no union at the end? What if the lady finds that the dog is not well? Do we have any kind of risk in non-happy endings? I just want to know that.
Well, that's your choice as a writer. Maybe the dog dies, right? That can also involve us emotionally, because oh, poor woman, you know, what's going to become of her? She's all alone. You know, what will she do? Lots of films have unhappy endings because they bring tears to your eyes, and that's also a good thing, you know. But whatever it is, you have to be emotionally involved. That's what a good story does. It engages your emotions.
Mahesh, what about dialogue? I mean, even this little bit you asked us to observe carefully. Now, obviously, if your characters come from different backgrounds, they speak differently also. So, could you tell us a little about that?
Well, it's good, I think, because your service is to your character, right? So, not every one of us speaks the same way. And I think theatre celebrates diversity. And I think it is perfectly legitimate to have characters speak in different languages or different accents. You can have two characters, one speaking in English and another one speaking in Hindi, and that's perfectly okay. There's nothing, I mean, you know, a lot has happened in the theatre, a lot has happened in movies, and we've moved away from formal dialogue writing. Right. So dialogue serves the character. Dialogue reveals character. It does not tell stories. That is weak writing, right? And dialogue has more to do with your character's reality than the writer's reality now. You know, so that's where we are at now. So in that sense, everything is perfectly okay, and you can have, you know, multilingual sort of environments. If it is a school where people are speaking in different languages, in different accents, that's perfectly acceptable. As writers, you have to be sensitive to dialogue.
Yeah, I was just coming to that. What about the danger then of sort of hamming or mocking your character?
Well, that's also, like you could see, you have to be truthful, right? You know what hamming is now, don't you? Yeah, so in the sense that you can't, there's no room for that in writing, in acting, in art per se. You cannot be untruthful to the work that you're creating. You cannot then say that, okay, I'm just going to play with audience and just sort of, so pull out of the creation and focus more on the viewer of that creation. Yes, there is a dialogue between the creator and the viewer of that, or the one who experiences the creation, but it is through the creation.
Because sometimes your frustration is that a character seems so one-dimensional, and you feel robbed, that you feel the playwright hasn't actually explored it themselves.
Exactly.
Know? How do we sort of, how do we retain our awareness and push deeper so that they're round a character?
You've answered the question yourself, is that you have to retain your awareness and push deeper. That's exactly what you need to do. As you could see, even thinking, now you've just had one grain of a thought about how to end it, right? But obviously, even something like gas leak thing, you need to think more deeper if you were to actually write the story. If you really want to engage people with their emotions, you'll have to think deeper. You can't come up with something predictable, because then people are not going to be engaged, because they feel, oh, we've seen this 100 times before. So today, if you do a boy meet girl thing, you can't have the villain hanging, you can't have the heroine hanging at the edge of the cliff, and the villain stamping at her hands, and the hero coming and having a fight, and knocking the villain over the cliff, and then saving the heroine, you know, using his hands, his strong hands, and just as he pulls them out and they hug, the families come together for the final picture. Now that you can't do that anymore, right? Because if you did that, it's going to be laughed at. People are not, you have to think of clever ways. You have to think, you have to go deeper. You have to go deeper into how you're going to bring about that reunion.
Will you share one of your favorite characters from any of your plays?
Any of my plays?
Yeah, your plays.
Oh, I have loads of favorite characters. I wouldn't write them if they weren't my favorites. Well, I quite like in my latest play, Where Did Nazia, I think is a wonderful character. Yeah, so she is.
Can you tell us about her? How did you find Nazia?
That's an interesting question. Is that she was inspired by Zora Segal, the Doyen, the great actress. But because I have met so many stage actresses, Nazia seems to be a collection of all those people I've met. So without revealing too much, I could say that my inspiration came from the people I know.
Okay. And who is Nazia? I'm sorry, I haven't read.
Yeah,
Who is
well, Nazia is this, she is 82, and she is this very famous stage actress who's also acted in films. But she's come to this point where she's tired of playing grandmother roles, and she wants to go back to the theatre because that's where her heart is. But as soon as she goes back into the theatre, there's so many problems that come her way, and how at the age of 82 she overcomes all those problems and creates her finale, grand finale production.
I think
Any
I'll
more
open it up. Yeah, there are
questions?
many questions.
Yes.
Sorry, sir, I'm too enthusiastic right now because you. Yeah, so I have a lot of questions. Again, speaking of characters, sir, there are times. I mean, when you're writing a play and there are a lot of characters involved, and you go deep into the intricacies of the play, and there are times when you don't understand that how would this particular character react in that situation. If I'm writing about something, if I have to write something around youth, I might be able to answer certain questions which might be raised by the audience. But if I speak of Nazia, or if I speak of a certain other play where there are characters involved which I can't understand, my intellect or my maturity, you call it anything, I am unable to understand. So there are times you just don't get the right emotions to express that how would that character X, Y, Z would react into this particular situation. One could be a stereotypical way which I know of, or that could be inspired by the experience or a basic exercise that notice the character's observations. But how do you get that motivation? How do you get that inspiration? Okay, this would be the right reaction of this character. I know there are thousands of reactions of a particular.
What is right and what is wrong is highly questionable.
Exactly, it's very subjective. But then something which is very close to the line of the play, something which the audience will digest and will not be scandalized in a way, because there are times.
They could be. Why not?
But then it will raise another set of questions which you need to answer.
Isn't that good? Because you yourself said that you don't want all the questions answered.
Yeah.
So if it raises more questions, which is also good.
It becomes, I mean, it's a chaos then. I mean, throughout the play,
Well,
you are
I think
throwing questions.
whatever pokes your audiences into out of their complacency, that your audiences which start sort of sitting back at sort of half dead, suddenly wake up and just say, what? That's good.
Thank you so much.
Mahesh, just
Yes,
to add
Neha
to
has
that,
a
sorry.
question, yeah.
Sometimes don't your characters take over and start just telling you what
You're
to
right.
do?
I didn't want to burden, the poor guy with all that, but that's exactly what happens. That after a point, if you've imagined your characters sufficiently and you believe in them, they actually speak for themselves and they do things that you wouldn't, intellectually you wouldn't think of. That's true. They surprise you as well. Like, for example, when Arushi was looking even when she was acting, there may have been moments when she was surprised. She didn't plan her moves, right? So she did say, at times she did, but it was very evident when she did, right? But it does surprise her that we could see, using that space over there, or, kneeling on the chair. And if I asked you immediately to come and act out a scene, I don't think people would do that. They would use so much space and they would try and do something to the audience.
Hello, sir. My question is, theatre, no doubt, is a projection of life, projection of reality, but at the same time, it is also larger than life projection, because there are artificial settings like sound and light. So what is the role of these artificial settings?
Yeah, as you could rightly use the word artificial, I would use the word artifice, because art also comes from the same root. is that it is a construction, or I would say a reconstruction of life. It's not life, as you rightly pointed out, it's an art form. And all art uses an artifice. Language in the theatre becomes an artifice. Action in the theatre becomes an artifice. Like, for example, as a painter, right? You're using, burnt sienna, or you're using, scarlet or something. And you could have pink bamboo. You could draw it. That's not real. In painting, then the colors then become your artifice, or whatever the equivalent in painting is. So it is an artificial reconstruction of life. That's what theatre is.
Can you stand up if you want the mic? Yeah.
Hello, yes, mic is close enough. Now, what I was wondering was, as a writer, your plays do get performed, and again, as a natural principle of the theatre or film, it is important, or at least in my opinion, the most important thing to bring out the writer's intent. How do you feel about your plays being adapted, or do you have any restrictions or anything that would make you feel like, oh, this is just not right?
Yeah. Oh, very often, or even if they've sort of produced it verbatim in that sense and exactly following my intent, I still sometimes feel, oh, this is just not right. So it's a very tricky question, because sometimes when an interpretation is something that initially I think of as, no, that can't happen, but when I see it performed in front of an audience, and the audience is accepting whatever is happening on stage, I say, okay, that's a possibility. So in that sense, if as a writer, if you're so possessive about your work, then you can't be a playwright or a screenwriter. It's like raising a child, that you're like a surrogate mother, that you raise the child, you create the child in your womb, feed it and nurture it for 9 months, and when the child is born, somebody else takes over. If you're not happy with that, then you can't be a playwright or a screenwriter. So that's part of the thing, is that as a, especially as a screenwriter, you have the first word, but you don't have the last word.
But it's also like a gift, Mahesh, that you've done and you've handed it
Yeah.
over.
Yeah, that's right. It is, because when 10 years down the line, when you see your child looking so beautiful and playing over there, you say, that came from me, so that's the kind of ego you can afford to have. But you can't have the ego that...
Possession.
Yes. Isn't that true of all relationships as well? That the ones that work are the ones where you let go, and I think that's true of writing as well.
Sorry, carry on.
When we're writing a play, like there are many times when there's a transition of a scene to a different setting, or there's a transition in the mood of a character. So how do you smoothen those transitions?
Why do you want to smoothen them?
So actually recently I wrote a play for a competition. We went for the British Council Dramatics competition. And I found it very hard to smoothen the transitions between, if they're going out of the classroom and into a garden. Or if the girl who's supposed to be the sweet, bubbly cheerleader, she suddenly takes the undertone of, being a scheming girl and, who's just trying to get where she wants to get by any means. So how do you smoothen that so that the audience doesn't think, she was just being sweet and what is she doing now? So they don't get confused. They understand, okay, the character is transiting from one element to another element. So how do you make the characters and the audience both believe in that element and not make it seem fake?
Well, that depends on how truthful you are to that transition. Because in reality, we do see people who are very sweet and nice. I'm very sweet and nice, but sometimes people annoy me, and I say, shut up, give me a chance to speak, and then I say, yes, Bob, what were you saying? And that says something about who I am. And I think that's very interesting about your character, that she is sweet and nice one moment, and then you see she's actually trying to get her best girlfriend's boyfriend, so That's nice. That's life, isn't it? That's what makes all of us interesting, is that we have a mask, but we are actually something else. That what we really want, we don't show. Like, you know, good complex characters are when there are these contradictions. Like, to make your character complex, you may be looking for the marker, but actually if you were pretending it doesn't matter and you're whistling and all that and you're slightly trying to look and then, you know, and then sort of thinking about it and look, and then no, you know, that then makes it even more. So there are ways of layering, and that comes with experience, you know. So I think, but you're asking the right questions, and you will find the answers in your writing. There's no, don't look for solutions, look for solutions within, and that will help you grow as a writer as well. There will be challenges, there will be things where audiences don't receive things the way you want them to, but good writing is all in the rewriting and re-looking at things. Right.
Yeah. So we are an immature group of people, you know. We do plays for college competitions only. And while writing a play, I face this dilemma every time. Once I write a play, you know, a friend circle, teachers, they come to me and say, okay, this things can be improved. There are 100 suggestions, and out of those 100, 50 are good as well. So how much shall I allow others' ideas to influence my play? They would influence for sure, but to what extent shall I allow them to influence my play?
Well, I can't put numbers, because writing is not about numbers. I think it's, if you feel, it's instinctive. Ultimately, at the end of it, writing is creative, right? Now, if you were painting something, a teacher or a mentor could tell you, look, that stroke, if this is what you wanted to do, it's a little weak. Maybe you need to practice that stroke a little bit before you can get the freedom to do it with confidence or whatever, right? That's what good mentoring is about, right? Now, if you're given 50 suggestions, see which one do you connect with, right? If at all you have to take these suggestions, and use, even if you don't believe in it, use it and then reflect on it. Why did the teacher ask me to do that? Is there something missing in this? So keep questioning, and you will find the answers. Now, one thing you can't allow is you can't allow your ego to come in the way of it, right? The most important thing ought to be the creation. And don't forget that it is ultimately, even if you are accepting suggestions, it is your creation, right? Like a parent would tell a child, sit straight, you know, eat your vegetables, drink your milk, right? Now, these are suggestions. Now, you can ask how many of these should a child accept and how many of them should a child reject. Can you answer that question? No, you can't, right? Because maybe you want to reject the milk because the child feels it's going to get a bad tummy and it's going to get loose motion and there's an exam, and so can say, Mummy, I can't drink this milk because I'll get loose motion. And then she'll say, okay, beta, don't have milk, have an orange instead. Okay, so there is that dialogue. Ultimately, the child has to eat it and digest it, right? So you're the child and you need to digest whatever comes your way.
Mahesh, have you ever sort of written a play, watched it being performed, and then wanted to change some of it?
Oh God, yes, all the time. Because I tend to sort of look at stuff and say, God, don't tell me I wrote that, you know, and you just want to get up on stage and say, no, give me another chance. I'll write it again and you can act it again. So it is because ultimately you have to be your toughest critic. I feel that that's when it's not whether you love your work or hate your work. You should really be able to revisit your work. I think
we have like what we call scratch recordings when you're doing films and audio. Do you have that? You know, get an amateur group maybe to perform, and then while you're tweaking it.
See, the thing is that we don't have the luxury of the film industry or the music industry where you have a lot of money at your disposal. Ideally, that's a good way of working, where you get your actor friends together, you rehearse a scene that you're still working on, and look at the possibilities that come out in the acting and say, okay, I think I've got some ideas, thank you very much, I'll call you in tomorrow after the rewriting. I've done that a couple of times when I could, I had the luxury of working with actors who have time. But in Bombay, that's less and less often because time is money, and you just can't afford to have your actors come in. But I think it's a great idea to work with maybe amateur actors and things and figure out certain things. I think it's a great way of working. Yeah. Yes, there's a question there.
Yeah.
How much time do we have?
We have another 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, hi Mahesh. I'm a director of an organization where my students, they perform street plays across the country. So I usually get students who are amateurs. So when I write street plays for them, is there something like a do and a don't that I need to keep in mind? Because in this country of ours, people really suffer from glossophobia, the fear of performance in front of public. So when I'm dealing with amateur college students and convincing them to perform on the street, a street play, what sort of tone should I have when I'm writing that street play? And what is it that I need to consider, keeping in mind that I have amateur youth who also have a problem on performing when it comes to street plays? Say,
Yeah. There are a huge number of challenges over there, I know. And I think there is a way of workshopping so that your actors are prepared for street performance, and the writing is also ready for street performance. Because the one thing you have to keep in mind is your audience. In the streets, they're moving, right? Now, unless, like, see, there are lots of people moving over there. They're going to say, this is boring, let's go there, let's have a chai over there, or maybe there's somebody more interesting talking over there. That's the audience you're dealing with. So you've got to grab them by the, you know what, and sort of hold them there. And that's in the writing, right? And in the performances, that the physicality of actors for street performances have to have that energy. You know, the energy should be in their fingers, in their chest, in their voice, etc. So that needs a lot of training. And I think street theatre, if you ask me, is a very, very difficult form, as you well have discovered. But if you could crack that, one of the incentives you could give your actors is, if you could perform on the streets and hold an audience, you could perform anywhere.
thanks.
We'll have one last question. Sorry.
Hi. I wanted to ask, if we are doing an absurdist theatre, so is it necessary that every element, every aspect of that play, of that performance, does every aspect of it have to be absurdist? For example, the music. It need not be absurd. Or is it necessary that in an absurdist theatre, everything needs to be...
Yeah. See, this is a question which comes up very often is, should we do this or should we not do this? I think it's very subjective. Like if you're directing a play that's absurd, I don't know whether it's Rhinoceros or Endgame or whatever absurd piece of absurd theatre you're doing, you make of it, you could do it very realistic and believable. And if that's what you feel the material is going to do. We tend to get caught up in these fancy notions of what the style has to do and what it needs to imply. I think if you're starting out, start simple but be truthful. That's all I could say, is that you're not going to move ahead. And remember that moving, progressing and learning is a lifetime occupation. I may have 30 years of experience in the theatre, but even today, you know, there's so many things that I can learn and relearn as well, right? So it's a constant learning and relearning process. So the more you do, the more you learn. But unless you have the foundation of being truthful to what you're doing, whatever you learn is not going to help you. So lay the foundation right, and then you yourself will be your teacher.
Mahesh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was a very, very enlightening
Thank
conversation with you.
Yeah.
And I think if we can go away this thing of be true to yourself,
yeah.
I think we would have actually really learned quite a bit. Thank you, Mahesh. And I think there is a book signing, right, with Mahesh?
Is there?
Yeah.
Okay. So
well, the volunteer will take you, Mahesh. It's right outside here, outside Darbar Hall.
Okay.
There's a little booth there where you can buy your books and you can get Mahesh to sign them.
How many of you want to buy it? Because if nobody wants to buy it, I won't waste my time there.
There's 1, 2.
Okay.
And if they know you're there, they'll buy
I'll
it.
be
then.
there.
Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you so much,
All right.
Mahesh.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Could we have a round of applause, please, for Mahesh? Yeah. I think that worked very well. Thank you.
Worked well.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah, we just sort of played it by ear.
I'm Sanjoy's wife, incidentally.
Oh my God.
That's okay. We met earlier.
We've met. I knew I met you, but I couldn't place you because
Obviously, this place also.
it's a real place. It's a full
Can someone just come and help with the lapel, please? Yeah. Yeah, it's from the back. Okay.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Mahesh.
Thank
and
you.
I'll see you around.
Yes,
Thank
see you
you. It
around.
was lovely.
Yeah,
Really.
thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you. Come. Surabhi, you'll take it? Yeah. Okay. Okay, I'll do my sponsor announcements now, but not.